Hello and welcome back to my third and final installment in my Civilization 4 tutorial series for beginners. In this video, I'll be covering the more militaristic approaches of the game, and I'm going to demonstrate how combat in Civilization 4 works and how you can leverage it to accomplish your goals of world domination. So to begin off with, I'm going to enter the world builder here, and this is simply for brevity, as I do not feel like taking the time to actually build up my economy to support the war that I'm going to wage. So this part is not important, but I'm going to place down some early units I would currently have access to. So I'm going to put down a galley, or two. We're going to put down a trireme. I'm going to put down a catapult, a spearman, an axeman, an archer, and a chariot. And we're going to need a third. No, actually, we're going to keep it like that. So now I'm going to exit out of the world builder, and I'm going to explain a little bit about this army that I have assembled here. So there are different types of units in the game, and if you go into the Civilopedia, you can see under unit categories the various different categories of units in Civilization 4. Air units only come into play later in the game, so you don't have to worry about those early on. Now, here we have the ranged units, also known as archery units. There are several different ones available. There are armored units. Once again, this only comes into play later in the game, such as the tank. Gunpowder units comes into play about the Renaissance era. Helicopter units, there's only one. Once again, that comes into play later in the game. Melee units, of which there are many, and you'll be seeing many of them in the Ancient to pretty much the Renaissance era. Mounted units, again, there are many of them, and you'll be seeing them up until the Industrial era, if not up until the Modern era with the cavalry. Naval units, which you will be seeing from the Ancient to the Modern era. Recon units, which is essentially scouts. And siege weapons, which I have the very basic one here, the catapult. So in my stack, I have a collection of units. Now, this collection is not optimal. Normally, I would go for something more, probably a little bit heavier on the melee side than what I have here. But what you have here is a very basic stack. And because units in Civilization 4 stack, you're going to be moving them around the world as a collective stack, as you can see here. So if we wanted to go ahead and declare war on Caesar over here in Rome, we could send our stack of units over there in 7 turns. And this varies quite drastically from Civilization 5, where each unit has to occupy its own tile. Each military unit has to occupy its own tile. And it changes the logistics of how combat works in Civilization 4. So now when armies meet in Civilization 4, it's done pretty much tile versus tile. There'll be a stack of units on one tile meeting a stack of units on another tile. And what determines the outcomes of these combats, it depends on what counters you have in your stack versus the counters they have in their stack. If they have an archer standing here, for example, on this tile, I don't have one there, we could take the chariot, for example, and would likely kill it because it is a strength 4, and the chariot and the archer does not have a bonus against mounted units. However, if there was a spearman here instead of a archer, and we decided to go against it with our chariots, we would almost certainly lose, as the spearman is a strength of 4, and the chariot is a strength of 4, but the spearman receives an additional 100% bonus versus mounted units. And this carries over with many other units, such as the chariot receiving a 100% attack against axemen. This is very specific, and the axeman receiving a 50% bonus versus other melee units, such as the swordsman or the spearman. So when assembling your stack of units to take a city, it's important to keep in mind the fact that you have to anticipate what you're going to encounter as resistance, because as you move your stack along, it will likely be attacked, and you want to make sure you have the right counters in your stack so that your stack doesn't get decimated by the one unit that it has a weakness to. For example, if I neglected to include a spearman in the stack and my opponent went heavy on cavalry against me, be it chariots or horse archers, I could suffer severe casualties to the stack because there is no spearman to easily defend or at least prevent that attack from happening. Now I'm going to move on to the Navy a little bit. In Civilization 4, once again, unlike Civilization 5, you cannot move your units into the water at all. It doesn't really matter on what research you have achieved. So you will need to have a galley to transport units. Now, galley is an ancient era vessel that's used to transport units, and as you move up through the ages, you will gain access to better forms of unit transportation, such as the galleon or the transport. But for the ancient era, and pretty much up until the Renaissance era, you're going to be stuck with galleys. And each galley has 2 unit space, which means we can fit 2 units inside of it. So in this case, I'm going to move my axeman inside and my chariot inside. Now, if we look at the stack here, the galley, it shows the axeman and the chariot both inside it. And if we move the galley 1 space, you can see the axeman and the chariot have moved with it. There are 3 little icons above the flag, which indicates how many units are currently on that tile. Now, one unit I haven't covered yet is the siege units. Basically, in this case, it's a catapult. And catapults are very important for taking cities because they are the only ones that can reduce the city's natural defense. And I shouldn't say just catapults. Siege units reduce a city's natural defense. Now, cities gain defense from 2 things. One is from buildings, such as walls and castles, and the other one is from the culture of the city. The more cultured the city, the higher its defense bonus is. And this is especially important in the later game when gunpowder units pretty much negate any benefit that having a wall or castle in your city would provide. For example, if you have a wall and a castle in your city, for example, my city, Washington here, I would receive a 100% defense bonus, and you can tell what bonus the city currently has. There is a little castle icon and with the percentage number next to it. But I would have 100% against all units except for gunpowder units. So when gunpowder units come up against me, if my city has no culture, even though it has a 100% defensive bonus provided via the walls and the castle, it would be 0% if a musket man came up to my city, for example, which is why it's important to increase your culture, the culture of the city. Now, to reduce this number, which is very important because it's providing a defensive bonus to the units inside the city. So, for example, my city has a 40% defensive bonus. That means that units attacking it will have to attack a stronger unit defending because this 40% is added to the defense value of my archer. It will increase their strength by 40%. You want to lower that before you actually send your main attacking troops in, and that is done via siege weapons. In this case, it's a catapult. The catapult, once in range of a city, one of the tiles directly adjacent to it, will be provided the option to bombard the city, and this will reduce the defenses of the city turn over turn. Buildings such as walls and the castle will reduce the rate at which the siege weapons can reduce the defense per turn at. So we're going to move the catapults into the other galley that I have on this location, and we're also going to move the spearmen into it. Now, the archers are not going to be very important. The only reason you might want to keep archers in the stack with your other attacking units is if you want to use them to defend the city after you have captured it. And that applies to pretty much any defensive unit, such as longbowmen, which would be the upgrade from the archer. It depends upon what area you're waging war in. But the really only reason to bring them along is to actually defend your holdings after you capture them. So now all my military units are in galleys, and here is the Trireme. And the reason that we have a Trireme, this is going to defend us against other ships of this era. Now, these are like battleships. They're going to defend my transports to make sure they don't get sunk on the way over to Rome to attack Julius Caesar. So I'm going to get started, and I'm just going to sail along the coast here. And it should be noted that the early units, naval units, can only sail along the coast. They cannot venture out into ocean unless it's controlled in your cultural borders. As you can see, my cultural borders are expanding into the water here. And if these tiles happen to be ocean, I could sail through them, but only because they are currently within my cultural borders. So when deciding to declare war on your opponents, it's smart to first scout out the territory around to see what you're going to be up against. In my case, I've noticed that while Julius Caesar only has archers to defend his main city of Rome, it is on top of a hill, and he does have walls built, as you can see right there. He has a little wall icon. So we're definitely going to have a hard time of taking that city. So instead, we'll most likely be landing here to take Cumae from Julius Caesar. The ideal location for me to land would be on either a forested tile or a hill due to the defensive bonus that this provides me. Ideally, it would be a forested hill, but forest still provides more defensive bonus than a hill does. And this should move on to another important point that I have to make. Units that can fortify can also receive defensive bonuses. So, for example, the catapult cannot fortify, and neither can the chariot. Mounted units and siege units are 2 units that cannot fortify to receive a defensive bonus. But melee units and archer units can fortify to receive a defensive bonus. And the max defensive bonus per tile is 5% per turn, up to a maximum of 25. So, as you can see in my city right here, my archer currently has a 25 an additional 25% defense bonus just from fortifying in that city. And by fortifying, basically what we mean is stationing it in that location for a certain amount of time. This archer here has a fortify bonus of 10% so far. And those units that can fortify can also take advantage of defense of natural terrain, for example, hills and forests. So it's important to remember that and use those terrains to your advantage while plotting out a war against your enemies, or even carrying out a war against your enemies. So you can see what I did here was rather sneaky, as I signed open borders with Caesar before actually declaring war on him. And this was to scout out his territory to see where I should attack. You could consider it a bit unethical, but we're just playing against AIs here, and so my word really has no authority with him. You know, it doesn't. They're just bots. So the turn has come to declare war on Julius Caesar. Now we're going to approach. Currently, we're not going to be prompted for war since we have open borders. When entering his borders, it will not cause a war. But we're going to cancel, or we could just declare war from here, which we will do. But yes, declare war. And it canceled my open borders deal with him. Now, as you can see here, it's always important to take advantage of opportunities that present themselves. In this case, there are 2 workers of Julius Caesar's right here building a quarry on the stone, which we can capture immediately by sailing in and occupying that tile. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to land my amphibious assault right here. I'm going to split them up, and I'm going to go ahead and steal those workers. I captured 2 workers, and that means that this is just part of the economic war that I'm waging against him. A war of attrition in Civilization 4 is definitely possible. If you do not currently have the military might to take the city, it is always advantageous to move around the countryside, pillaging certain improvements on, for example, here we have there's a road improvement on here. Here there is a pasture improvement, and we can pillage those improvements. This will prevent Julius Caesar, in this case, from being able to use them. It will cripple his economy while he is trying to build a force large enough to take out our home invasion force. And if we have very good promotions and a large enough stack, we can fortify them, for example, in a forest on top of a hill, and they will be very difficult to assail, which means that we're essentially terrorizing, or what would be considered a war of attrition we would be waging against him, because we are in his territory and he really can't he can't grow as he normally would during times of peace, and yet we can, because he has not occupied our territory yet. So it can be advantageous to declare war early on an enemy to do this to them. So we're going to finish unloading the rest of our units from this ship. You can simply I think we can just click on the galley. Yeah, you select the boat or the galley, the ship that the units are currently in, and right-click on the tile you want them to go to. They'll automatically exit. So our entire siege force is here. The ships cannot bombard yet. So one of the options we'd be given is blockading trade, which I'll do with the Trireme, and the galleys will sleep. Next turn, my galley will actually be set that fishing boat to sleep. Next turn, my galley will actually be transporting my newly captured workers back into my homeland so they can help me. So let's take these 2 workers and get them out of harm's way right away. I'm moving my galley back with the spoils of war thus far. Now, unfortunately, Cume does not have any defensive bonus because it doesn't have any culture and it doesn't have any walls. So we're not going to be able to bombard it. However, this brings into play another very important aspect of siege weapons, and that is the fact that they cause collateral damage. And what that essentially means is that while this catapult is unlikely to survive against this archer, it will do damage to this archer, and not only this one, but the other units in that city. I think it's up to about 5 at a time. So what attacking the city with a catapult will do, imagine there are 5 units in the city. I throw this catapult at it, and even though it doesn't win, it damages all of them slightly, which makes it easier for my other units to have an advantage over them. So I'm going to do that right now. Our catapult did die, but as you can see, one archer took, it only has 0.8 defense left, and the other one only has 2.6 out of 3 strength left. I shouldn't say defense, there was just strength, and it applies to both attacking and defending in Civilization 4. So now that both units are injured, it'll be easier for me to capture the city. And I don't expect to have good odds here, but here is a mounted unit, and one of the benefits of mounted units is that they have a withdrawal chance. The chariot is only 10%, but this increases as you progress in the game, with the cavalry, I think, having a 30% withdrawal chance by default, and you can increase that up to 50% or maybe it's a 20%, and you can increase it up to 50% with promotions. So imagine a 50% withdrawal chance here. That is pretty reasonable, especially when you're going up against very unfavorable odds. So we're going to try it now. It's unlikely that I'm going to win or retreat, but that's just what you have there. Now, we didn't do a whole lot of damage that second unit, which means that the odds here are 88.9%. We're going to attack with that Axemen. Axemen are very good against assailing cities, but the swordsmen are better. It depends upon what your defender has in the city. If they have Axemen in the city, then Axemen will likely be the best unit to use against it. Otherwise, swordsmen can be promoted for attacking cities, and since they are one additional base strength than the Axemen, generally will have more favorable odds. So here we go. The spearmen can kill the last archer successfully. And we have now captured the city. And that's essentially how cities are captured in Civilization 4. Unlike Civilization 5, you don't really have to wear it down at all. And simply killing the garrison inside the city will be enough to take it. Now, there will be cultural penalties associated with taking the city. We go in here, we can see the culture is currently only 12% American and 87% Roman. This would be even more unfavorable if the city had a significant culture. In addition to that, the more cultured one city is towards one civilization, the more unhappy they will be under your occupation. You cannot turn them into puppet states in this game, so when you capture a city, you either have to raise it or keep it for your own empire. And if you are fighting somebody of the same religion as you, over time your population will grow war weary, and therefore they will start being unhappy in your cities. Now, in my case, I have captured this city from Julius Caesar, and we're just going to talk to him for a bit here. He will currently not talk to me. But later on, as I gather more troops against him, he will eventually decide to talk to me, and you can make peace for a certain settlement. It will be a deal agreed upon between the two of you for resources and gold technologies, etc. And another option is going to be making this civilization into a vassal state. And that means essentially asserting your dominance over them. They really don't see any future for them if they do not surrender to you. And once they agree to become your vassal state, they cannot easily break away from you again. So this essentially allows you to create like city-states in Civilization 5 and Civilization 4, except they are obedient to you pretty much forever. And they might be very unhappy with you, but they cannot do a whole lot about that, except refuse your resource demands, in which case like a war breaks out between you and them and you get to fight them again. Otherwise, you cannot fight them. So I think that has pretty much covered the essence of combat in Civilization 4. Like I said, we could blockade trade here. And for example, with the Axemen, I could have pillaged the road to sort of wage a war of attrition against them. But that pretty much covers combat. When it comes to defending your own cities, it is best to build walls and station defensive units in your cities. I would recommend at least 2 defensive units, be they archers, longbowmen, riflemen, infantrymen, because sometimes luck can deal you a bad hand and you will just lose to the first attack, even though you had the favorable odds. So it's best to ensure that you just have the ability to defend that city. Ideally, you'd want even more units in your cities, but sometimes that's simply not going to be financially viable. For example, my unit cost right now is costing me 4 per turn based on the number of units I have. Unit supply is how much it costs to finance units that are outside your borders. Now, units inside your borders do not cost any additional besides the base unit cost, but units that are outside your border, in addition to the base unit cost, they also cost you unit supply for any unit over 4 units. You're allowed 4 units to go out into the big wide world and explore and attack as you see fit. But anything in addition to that is considered like a military force, and you essentially have to finance it. So I think that is pretty basically it. I have covered the different unit counters and how to siege and take a city in Civilization 4. And with that knowledge, you should now be able to start your own civilization off. You should be able to get your own civilization off to a good start in Civilization 4. There was a lot more to do in Civilization 4. Do not make any mistake in thinking that the game is actually very shallow. But this will provide an essential introduction to the series to get you started and on the right path. If I missed anything or if you have any additional questions, feel free to leave them in the comments section below. Thank you as always for watching, and I hope to see you next time.